In the early 1800s, John Bell moved his family from North Carolina to the Red River bottomland in Roberts County, Tennessee, settling in a community, Red River, which became Adams, Tennessee, many years later. Bell purchased some of the land and a large house for his family. Over the next years, he acquired more land, increasing his holds to 328 acres, and cleared a number of fields for planting. He was also made an elder of Red River Baptist Church. The Bells had 3 children after moving to Tennessee. Elizabeth, who was nicknamed Betsy, was born in 1806. Richard was born in 1811, and Joel was born in 1813. One day in 1817, John Bell was inspecting his cornfield when he encountered a strange-looking animal standing in the middle of a corn row. Shocked by the appearance of this animal, which had the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit, Bell shot several times. The animal vanished. Bell thought nothing more about the incident, at least not until after dinner. That evening, the Bells began hearing beating noises outside the walls of their log house. The mysterious sounds continued with increased frequency and force each night. Bell and his son often hurried outside to catch the culprit, but always returned empty-handed. The Bell children began waking up frightened, complaining that rats were gnawing at their bedposts. Not long after that, the children began complaining about having their bed covers pulled from their pillows and tossed on the floor by a seemingly invisible entity. As time went on, the Bells began hearing faint whispering noises, which was too weak to understand, but sounded like a feeble old woman singing hymns. The encounters escalated, and the Bells' youngest daughter, Betsy, began experiencing brutal encounters with the invisible entity. It would pull her hair and slap her relentlessly, often leaving welts and handprints on her face and body. The disturbance, which John Bell told his family to keep a secret, eventually escalated to such a point that he decided to share his family troubles with a close friend and neighbor, James Johnson. Johnson and his wife spent the night at the Bell's house, where they were subject to the same terrifying disturbances that the Bell had experienced. After having his bed covers removed and being slapped repeatedly, Johnson sprang out of bed exclaiming, "In the name of the Lord, who are you and what do you want?" There was no response, but the remainder of the night was relatively peaceful. The entity's voice strengthened over time to the point where it was loud and unmistakable. It sang hymns, quoted scriptures, carried on intelligent conversations, and once even quoted, word for word, 2 sermons that were preached at the same time on the same day, 13 miles apart. Words of the supernatural phenomenon soon spread outside the settlement, even Nashville, where the Major General Andrew Jackson took keen interest. John Bell Jr., Drury Bell, and Jesse Bell, John Bell's eldest son, had fought under General Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. In 1819, Jackson decided to visit the Bells' farm and see what all the hoopla was about. Jackson's entourage consisted of several men, some well-groomed horses, and a wagon. As they approached the Bells' property, the wagon began to stop. The horses couldn't pull it anymore. After several minutes of cursing and trying to get the horses to pull the wagon again, Jackson proclaimed, "By the infernal, boys, that must be the Bell Witch." Then a disembodied female voice told Jackson that they could proceed and that she would see them again later that evening. They were then able to proceed across the property, up the lane, and to the Bells' home, where Jackson and John Bell had a long discussion about Indians and other topics, while Jackson's entourage waited to see if the entity was going to manifest. One of the men claimed to be a witch tamer. After several uneventful hours, he pulled out a shiny pistol and proclaimed that the silver bullet would kill any evil spirit it came into contact with. He went on to say that the reason nothing was happening to them was because whatever had been disturbing the Bells was scared of his silver bullet. Immediately, the man screamed and began jerking his body in different directions, complaining that he was being stuck with pins and needles and being beaten severely. A strong, swift kick to the man's posterior region from an invisible foot sent him flying out the front door. Angry, the entities then spoke to them and announced that there was yet another fraud in Jackson's party, and that would be identified and tormented for the following evening. Now terrified, Jackson's men begged to leave the Bells' farm, but Jackson, on the other hand, insisted on staying so that they could ascertain who was the fraud. The men eventually went outside to sleep in their tents, but continued begging Jackson to leave. What happened next is not very clear, but Jackson and his entourage were spotted in nearby Springfield early the next morning, presumably en route to Nashville. Over time, Betsy Bell became interested in Joshua Gardner, a young man who lived not far from her. With the blessing of their parents, they decided to marry. Everyone was happy about their engagement, well, almost anyone. The entity, for reasons unknown to that day, repeatedly told Betsy not to marry Joshua Gardner. Betsy and Joshua, former schoolteacher Richard Powell, had been noticeably interested in Betsy for some time, and had expressed interest in marrying her when she became older. By some accounts, Powell, who was 11 years Betsy's senior, was a student of the occult, although it has not been proved. He was secretly married to a woman in nearby Nashville, Esther Scott, during the time he spent at Red River, expressing his fondness for Betsy. According to the old accounts, Powell politely expressed his disappointment with Betsy's engagement and wished for a long, prosperous marriage with Joshua Gardner. Betsy and Joshua could not go to the river, the field, or the cave to play without the entity taunting them persistently. Their patience finally reached critical mass, and on Easter Sunday of 1821, Betsy met Joshua at the river and broke off their engagement. The disturbances decreased after Betsy ended the engagement, but the entity continued to express its dislike for John Bell and vowed relentlessly to kill him. Bell had been experiencing episodes of twitching in his face and difficulty swallowing for almost a year, and the malady seemed to grow worse with time. By the fall of 1820, his declining health had him confined to his house, where the entity commenced removing of his shoes when he tried to walk and slapping his face when he experienced seizures. Her loud, shrill voice could be heard all over the farm, cursing and chanting "Old Jack Bell," as she often referred to him. John Bell breathed his last breath on the morning of December 20, 1820, after slipping into a coma the day before. Immediately after his death, the family found a small vial of unidentifiable liquid in the cupboard. John Bell Jr. gave some of it to the cat, which quickly died instantly. The entity then spoke up, exclaiming joyful, "I gave old Jack the big dose of the last night, which fixed him." John Jr. quickly threw the vial into the fireplace, where it burst into a bright, bluish flame and shot up the chimney. John Bell's funeral was one of the largest ever held in Robertson County, Tennessee. As his family and friends began leaving the graveyard, the entity's laugh was loud and began singing a song about the bottle of brandy. It is said that her singing didn't stop until the very last person left the graveyard. The entity's presence was very rare after that, almost as if its purpose was complete. In the April of 1821, the entity visited John Bell's widow Lucy, and told her that it would return and visit in 7 years. The entity returned in 1828 as promised. Most of its visit concerned around John Bell Jr., with whom the entity discussed such things as origins of life, civilization, Christianity, and the need for a mass spiritual reawakening. Of particular significance were its nearly accurate predictions of the Civil War and other events. The entity said farewell after 3 weeks, promising to visit John Bell's most direct descendant in 107 years. The year would have been 1935, and the closest living direct descendant of John Bell at the time was Nashville's physician, Dr. Charles Bailey Bell. Dr. Bell wrote himself the book The Bell Witch, published in 1934. No follow-up was published, and Dr. Bell died in 1945. The cause of the Bell's torment almost 200 years ago, as well as today's horrid, unexplainable manifestations, remains a mystery. Numerous theories abound, but there is no one theory that is universally agreed upon by Bell Witch enthusiasts and researchers. There probably never will be. Different people have different standards of proof. Most do agree that there was something very wrong at the Red River settlement in the early 1800s, and that there may well be something wrong. It happened to the John Bell family in 1817. Maybe next time it'll happen to your family. Hold that for now. pleasant dreams.